Blog 1. Justice. Initially, I thought I believed justice was incarceration, halfway houses, house arrest, bail, and the community being aware of the person's actions. While working through Kai Chang Tom's workbook, I realized that my idea of justice included a reconnection with society, a reconnection with oneself, restitution, education around the harm that was caused, and accountability for one's actions. These coincide with transformative and restorative justice philosophies. Restorative justice involves repairing relationships between the offenders, victims, and communities, and it promotes conversations between the parties involved to look at the needs, harms, and obligations between them. Restorative justice also establishes avenues for active participation in the justice process along with the opportunities for restitution between the victim and the offender. Restorative justice seeks to modify the social factors that contributed to the harm occurring. With transformative justice, participation between the offender and the victim is not required, and the involvement of the community is considered in how it both enables and deters harm. It also addresses that healing and accountability are separate processes. Both forms of justice examine the relationships between the victim, offender, and the community. They are change-oriented, contextual, and non-punitive. While I look at these ideas of justice, I struggle internally with my own personal experience of being sexually assaulted at work and my idea of justice for my offender. I have no desire to participate in the process for restitution, and I have difficulty seeing a place for restorative justice. I also struggle understanding how transformative justice could play a role, and I struggle with my desire to keep my offender in prison and a desire for rehabilitation. However, at work, I was also working with a client who was convicted of an offense against a child and was going through the process of rehabilitation following incarceration, and I was able to support them and let go of the judgment that they should still be imprisoned. Another example of conflict at work that has come up in reflection is having the knowledge that someone I previously worked with is returning to the organization. I had a conflict with this person previously that was not sufficiently resolved, and I witnessed inappropriate behavior during their previous term of employment. I brought concerns to management upon discovering the intent to hire them with no follow-up. The person was recently seen on the schedule, and I took it upon myself to inform staff they were likely to be working with of the information I was aware of. Gossiping. Upon reflection, I did not feel good about gossiping with other staff, understanding that there was a better way to resolve the previous conflict and that people can change without having their past held against them. Communities that I think are impacted by the way our society practices justice, which is more punitive in nature, are BIPOC communities. Prison population is composed of a higher number of members of these communities comparatively to white people. This is due to systemic racism. These communities are also impacted because the way our society practices justice is a colonial system brought by the Europeans. Other cultures practice justice using restorative and transformative justice methods that were effective prior to colonialism, and this way of practicing justice is a loss of culture for these communities. Another community being impacted by the way our society practices justice is the unhoused community. This community has had many harmful interactions with multiple levels of the justice system. While I still struggle with my own experience, change in the justice system is necessary to hold offenders accountable for their actions while reestablishing connections to their communities and the victims where requested, which is important for identity and belonging. The system is not working the way it was built, as with the current penal system, offenders are often going through a revolving door and are not held accountable for their actions. There's often no rehabilitation while they are incarcerated and are reoffending after release occurs. There may be no sense of community or belonging with offenders, and there's limited opportunity for therapy after they're released due to funding. There's also shame and stigma around having been incarcerated and towards some of the offenses having been imprisoned. Change is also necessary so that communities that are being impacted the most by the current system can have their voices heard regarding justice and what that looks like. In addition, change is necessary to reduce the number of people being imprisoned, which can prevent the participation between the offender and the victim and our community. Some changes that would need to take place would be more community centers for youth and adults to engage in learning new skills and building community with each other, more culturally centered programs, more mediation programs, more funding for therapy programs, awareness campaigns to decrease stigma, and in addition, more affordable housing needs to be created. To create these changes, the government will be required to provide more funding for mental health initiatives as well as community organizations. There will need to be awareness campaigns for mental health around different issues to talk to someone about. The government will need to create a policy around private housing and affordable housing units Prisons could be torn down and housing can be built in their places. Communities will need to come together to support each other, working through conflict together, and be open to communication. A committee should be established by the government to hear from people what supports are required. These changes will support the communities that are currently being ignored or oppressed by allowing them to be heard. The changes will provide spaces for conflict resolution and allow for community building. These changes will show that people are not disposable and are worthy of compassion and capable of change.